So today is the 15th of October 2012. We are here with, or I'm here with Graham Bligh at St. Lucia School of Architecture, and my name is Janina Gosseye. So today I guess we would like to go into a little bit more detail on the buildings to get some more information on the projects themselves. Last time we discussed a bit your career, starting from when you studied, when you practiced both here and abroad. But today we really like to go into some of the projects that you listed as relevant projects for the firm, and also some of the projects that you think are relevant for Queensland post-war architecture in general. And the buildings that you're listed, maybe we should just start on the top of the list with the Amoco service stations, or if you want to start with any other one of the buildings, or if you want to group them, that's also fine. But basically I would like to discuss a bit how the design process occurred for each of these buildings. Why do you consider them relevant for the firm? And if you think they represent a typical Queensland architecture there, or if that's not really the case, and that's a bit what we would like to discuss.
Okay. The Amoco service stations came about from an American client, and which was Amoco, I think, in the United States. Anyway, they're opening their new thing here, starting in Queensland. And the thing about it was that they wanted us to come up with an appropriate design for Queensland, and which would make its mark and make a statement. So we came up with this big canopy, and it was sort of a straightforward, crisp glass to the office. And I remember particularly the canopies, because in those days the service stations didn't have canopies.
They didn't?
No, they were sort of funny round things, or nothing at all, or just a little thing over the pumps. And so we did this, and so the big shade thing for Queensland. And then we found, after they'd been opened, we noticed other service companies then starting to put shade on, and things, just the big companies, Caltex, Shell, were doing that. And I was a bit peeved, and I spoke to my American client, and I said, look at what all these people, they're copying us. And I remember to this day his reply, which was, he didn't get disturbed. He said, it's better to be copied, Graham, than be ignored. And I've remembered that. And we were able to do a service station in 6 weeks, construction. And I reached the view there on site one day. I said to the client, look, if you stand still, you're going to get painted, because it just went straight through, crisp, organised work. And there was some big engineering in getting the tanks installed. But the other memorable thing about that for us at that time was that it was the time when there was a significant recession in the country, and there are a number of architects, young architects in Queensland, driving taxis. And because of the service station program, we were able, which was all set, we were able to go through, and had it not been for that, that would have been a very difficult time for us. So from a practice, they're important, and from a design point of view, I think they're relevant. I know people look down their nose because they're an industrial building, but that's by the way, because it was the big canopy and the crisp, and they were good designs. And we even sort of came about not inventing a new material, but for the fascias. They were a glazed metal fascias, which was a product that wasn't readily available. And so we got this one because we wanted bright colour, and which was the red and the blue of Amico and the white. We wanted the bright colour and able to withstand the weather. So these glazed paints, baked enamel finishes were used.
And
so it's memorable for those things.
You said the Amico service stations was an American service station originally. Was the design in one way or another influenced by the service stations that had already been built? It was a completely new deferred...
No, we wanted something that was applicable
so they didn't have
to this country and for the climate, and a fresh, architecturally designed design.
Yeah.
And so they were an enlightened company at that time, and they were taken over by another company, and I think there's only a couple of them left now.
It's a pity.
Yeah.
And so the Amico service stations, you said, took you through the Depression, but you also have a lot of projects in education or college buildings. You listed Gatton Agricultural College, the Commerce Building here at UQ, the Teaching College at Mount Gravatt. How did you come by these projects? Do you think it was relevant that you did one of these campus designs and then got the other commission because you did one, or how did
I think that probably the one that made its mark was getting Gatton College, and Gatton College at that time was the principal there was a fellow called Neil Britton, who was a pretty sharp, organised headmaster at that time, and they had just the state works. They were getting their buildings from state works. Well, they'd only had a few buildings really, and they were coming through a new era of development. They weren't incorporated with the University of Queensland, and they had a dining room built, a dining room, general purpose room, and then in a storm that came through, it blew down, and there was a lot of to-do about that. It wasn't occupied, but it was still close to being occupied, and it had enough surface area there to get the wind in it. Anyway, it came down. It might have even been, during the construction or something. And so there's a lot of problems with that. And then the state works got us to pick up the design after they'd fixed up the dining room. And then because of a personal relationship then that my old man, Arthur Bligh, was able to establish with Neil Britton, we did building after building, but we ended up doing the whole campus, and in fact doing the campus plan. And since the university's taken over, of course, we never did work there. But we nevertheless had the buildings were, I think they were good buildings because they were student orientated. In other words, they were robust. From a construction point of view, they got the most value from their investment, and they felt good. They felt good as a complex. Each one was designed for its particular use, and one of the things that the Neil Britton was able to do was to have in his drawer a completed set of documents for a building, and invariably in the federal budgeting and grants, the time had come in June where the Treasury would say, look, we've got this amount of money unallocated, but the projects haven't been available. And Neil Britton was always able to say, I'll take it, and he could go straight into it. And that organisation, was arranged for the time, and he is very smart in doing that, because he's able to keep that program of development continually going. And the other thing about those buildings is that, I came to understand early that you can't, in briefing, it's terribly important to speak to the users. And I've gone through most of my buildings with learning from that, and in each case of these, and Neil Britton was okay with that, and it's something you can't do with State Works, going through them, because they do the client briefing. And I was able to have, a deep understanding of what the needs of the buildings were through speaking to the directors of that particular department, and even in their head lecturers, and understand all the subtleties of the needs, and those buildings were very successful. They were varied, and from operating things to lecture rooms to science buildings.
And you said, so you did the master plan for Gatton, more or less?
Yes, that came because the buildings were coming along, and the plan was just not able to cope with the needs of that and the traffic and things. So we did a master plan to carry us through and provision for the future. I dare say it's been changed since then, but nevertheless that's.
But you were basically, Bligh Jessup Bretnell was basically the only architects at that time building. There were no other architects that you commissioned to do some buildings. And how did you try to establish some sort of coherency in all the buildings that were done? Was there a preconceived idea of materials that you would use, or I don't know, a limit to how many levels a buildings would have, or was there some sort of idea when you did the master plan how you would get coherency in the whole campus site?
Yes, yeah. Well, you mentioned bricks before. The bricks we used came from nearby brick provisions, and there was concrete, and there was all pretty simple materials. It wasn't complex. No, it was. And you mentioned before the Commerce Building here in the university. We were commissioned there through the university architect at the time.
Burrell? Was that Burrell?
I think it must have been, or it might have been. No, I think it was Jim McCormick. He came after that. I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was, and we had but it was a building that wasn't. It may not have been Jim, because Jim.
I don't know
he liked to do the design and control the design, and in this one we were able to handle it from go to woe in design terms.
And how did you obtain the commission for the Commerce Building?
How did we
obtain the commission? Was it through?
Through the university directly.
They just commissioned. There was not a tendering process, or there was no competition for the building. It was just university contacted you because you had done the agricultural college.
I don't think there was. It wasn't. I don't think it was a competition. I don't remember, but I don't think it was. And I thought it was a good building.
Yeah, definitely.
And and stuck with with the concrete, and internal space, the internal atrium, and whether it's used the way it was intended to be used now, I don't know. But then that's a fair while ago. What year was it? Be 40 years ago?
I think it was
30?
the early 70s, so it's 40 years ago that was built.
Yeah.
And you said here you use concrete. When I see the photographs of the Gatton College, it's mostly brick. There are also some buildings in concrete.
And structural concrete exposed. Yeah.
But here you chose concrete. Was that because of the relationship with the library on the opposite side, or why did you?
Yes, it was a fashionable approach in a way. Architects exploring new materials, and Robin Gibson had done, there was that lovely concrete work at the art gallery, and it seemed to be used in a few buildings from there, and Jim Birrell had used it in the car park. And here it's been able to stay the way it is, but where that approach has been used in more urban environments, it just doesn't work because it gets too dirty. And whereas the concrete on the Commerce building still gets dirty, but it's weathering. It's okay.
And you think, because you mentioned other architects here were using it, but also internationally, this whole brutalist type of building was gaining momentum?
Yes.
Was that also influencing?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And do you remember any projects in particular from, you mentioned the ones here in Brisbane, but also in Queensland or in Australia in general and abroad, that stood out of this type of raw concrete buildings?
Oh, I can't remember any particular concrete, any particular buildings, but I just... it's a trend that you felt was emerging. Yeah, but there would have been some, in magazines around
is it fair for me to say that the use of concrete was more because you felt that it was an international trend rather than for climatic reasons that you use it?
No, because we wanted to, you can see from the outside that the windows are offset in the panels, and that was to try and get the windows protected from the western sun, so they hug the northwestern thing behind a fin of concrete, and then to get the depth and to get around the structure, then they splay out. They splay out as a sill and they splay out as a side. So that, and we're able to get precast units done, and the process of precasting had not recently, but it had come into Brisbane and was pretty, it was accepted, and you could arrange that. And there was a good relationship you could do with the precasting companies and the engineering, the architecture. So it was pushing boundaries, but you're able to do that.
It's very interesting that you mentioned these windows, because indeed that's a very good point, that it is adjusted to the climatic conditions here. Is there also something in Gatton Agricultural College? Because I saw photos where you have a lot of pathways that have been covered by I can't think of the English word, sorry, covered pathways. Was that also from the beginning? I saw some photos, I don't know, I haven't been there yet, so I don't know if that was done consistently throughout the design, that you use covered pathways and for climatic reasons, or can you think of some other things that you did specifically to adjust the buildings to the climate here, or that was...
I think when you're an architect here, it's something you have to be very conscious of. So it's in any buildings we do, I think, are conscious of those naturally, you're conscious of it.
So you're conscious of it, so you don't really think about it anymore as something that you have to do. It's just in the design.
It automatically comes out.
Ingrained in the design. Yeah. And then you also did the teaching college at Mount Gravatt.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. There we were we were more working as an arm of State Works, and the man there was Peter Prastupa, I think, and we were appointed to back them up, although we did the design. And that's got a bit of concrete, you know, sunshades and things. I think it's an interesting building, that one. It's an interesting building, but it's a building that's tucked away from the. People just don't see it because the campus is tucked away. It's the other Mount Gravatt campus, which is more prominent, and this teachers' college was just hiding behind the trees there all by itself, and it was up on the roof, for instance. It's where there's that we developed that timber space frame to hold the roof structure, which is expressed down below. The use of zinc in the lecture rooms and other rooms, and perforated zinc for acoustics, and the form concrete sunshades on the outside, and the framing that holds the concrete sunshades up. So it was a lot of elements in there were, I won't say they were new, but they were, it was pushing the boundaries and exploring opportunities and coming together in a contained piece of architecture, I think.
And in the same period, more or less, I think it was Blair Wilson, John Dalton and Robin Gibson were working on the Griffith campus.
Yes.
Do you think the designs influence each other? The design that Bligh, Jessup, Bretnell was doing at the time for the campus on...
I don't think it had any bearing at all.
No?
No. Well, they're two different campuses.
But you didn't really look at the way they did... Okay, they didn't do the master plan, somebody else did the master plan,
Johnson, someone...
Yeah, I forgot the name. But you didn't go there and see, or there were no... Because campus design, I think, was a rather new thing in that period.
I think we did that. I don't know how the years go. I don't think that might have been done at the same time, or was it at the same time?
More or less, I think, at the same time, yes.
So that building wouldn't have had any bearing on the Griffith University, and Griffith University had no bearing on what we were doing.
What were you looking at? Because this campus design that you did for Gatton, it was very new. Which examples did you look at? Were you looking at the way campuses were laid out somewhere else, or was it all done? I don't know. Did you look at reference works of campus?
Oh, we would
planning?
have done. We would have done, but I don't. It would have been a light reference, I imagine. Yeah.
You didn't visit particular places, or you don't remember visiting other campus sites in Australia or abroad at the time to...
Well, certainly not abroad. There was one down in Sydney, but which was a reference that Philip Cox did, an agricultural college, because an agricultural college is quite different than an urban college, and there weren't many agricultural colleges. From Gatton, or while we're doing Gatton, outside your 75 period, we did the Dalby Agricultural College with Lend-Lease. And in that one I said to the Lend-Lease, if we're going to do this, we want a client interface, and we want to work on site for have an office there, and the director of the Dalby Agricultural College during this development stage used to come by our office, into our drawing office. I had a team up there, and he liked having an ice cream, so we had to keep an ice cream in the fridge. And I remember the project manager saying, "Graham, have you got enough client contact And we could almost see John Brimble come outside and almost, close the doors or something. But it was very good.
Yeah.
It kept him very informed, and everyone was, knew just what was going on. It's a good way to work. It's good.
So you think for the agricultural college, as you mentioned before, the contact with the client was more important to get a notion of how the buildings had to work rather than looking at other reference works of campuses,
Yes.
except for the Cox one.
Yeah. And there were certain, things set in place like the traffic circulation, vehicular traffic, and there's industrial traffic had to come through, like for the piggery and the poultry breeding sheds and things we'd never even done, like an intensive minimal disease piggery that we did there. Was used as a model in the agricultural pastoral world, and it was a reference place in the country.
So actually you were doing the innovative work, making this...
just interpreting what the staff were telling us and the director was wanting, and it was a piggery that you had to go through a decontamination room and put on proper footwear and gowns and things, and it was
innovative.
It was a good, and we even I had difficulty though in coping. We did the abattoir up there, and that was a pretty difficult thing for a while. I couldn't eat meat for 3 months after that, and we did that I think just before we did the Dolby thing. It would have been right about the 1975 sort of time, I think. It was an interesting, it was one of those buildings you remember in your back in years as one of the rich experiences.
I remember going through your archives just now at Bligh, finding a drawing of hatchets for the poultry abattoir. That you were also thinking about the technical aspect of it very much. It seems because this drawing was really going like the chicken goes in like that, and it was into actually like the crossing line between the building and the machinery that they used. It seems like you were very close to not only designing the building but also designing the technological side of the building.
I know we were.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see.
I'd forgotten some of that.
We'll have the drawings in the film, so you can see them. No, it's very interesting to hear. And then you also have listed 2 houses, Bligh House on Chapel Hill and O'Neill House in St. Lucia, of houses that you think are relevant for the practice. Why do you think they stand out? Because I imagine you've done quite some residential work in that period.
No, not a great deal.
No?
Not a great deal. Well, the O'Neill House preceded the Bligh House. But I'm still fitting in there.
You're still fitting in.
The O'Neill House was, I think it was almost the first house I did when I came back from working in Europe. And these people came into the office and referred to my old man, I guess, and then I was nominated. I was an associate then, I think. I was nominated to do this building, and we got on fine. The O'Neills trusted me and listened to me and what have, and then we got the design right. They said, well, we'll leave it to you. And they went back to Richmond. They had a property in Richmond. And I had to then do the documentation, arrange the construction, and work out the colours and all the details, and without having they just stayed up there and they came back when it was finished.
That's handy. for them?
Well, it was, I thought it would have been handy for me too, but I missed it was a bit scary.
Yeah, I can
But
imagine.
it all finished on time and on budget, and it was an interesting place because it expressed the timber frame. It had cell cured timber framing, which was on a hardwood, which was expressed as a post and beam sort of expression, and then the asbestos cement or fibre cement or whatever it was at the time, then be painted white, and it had a Japanese sort of feel. It had broad eaves. It didn't get up and make a statement, but it was a gentle sort of simple, crisp house, Brisbane-y sort of house. It got an award. Well, the Amaco station did too, and I think maybe something at Gatton did.
I'd have to check. I know for sure that the
Yeah,
O'Neill
Amaco
has got
did.
an award, but I have to check for the other ones. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, it was an interesting place, and I I was pretty wrapped in this cell-cured, which is a copper chromate impregnated timber. So then we came around, and I was itching to do our own house, so the wife and I bought a block of land out at Chapel Hill, and in this virginal bush country, and we built a timber house, and the whole outside of the building was clad in copper chromated impregnated timber weatherboards, not chamfer boards, weatherboards. So the whole house was green, and the other thing about that, it's supposed to not need any attention. So that was fine, and the inside, I can get a bit impulsive, I know, but I thought, okay, we're doing timber, let's go timber right through. So the whole inside of the house was lined with blue gum, I think it was blue gum, chamfer boards, which is a beautiful red colour, and the floor was then all not silver ash, crow's ash flooring boards. So it was very pure in its sort of interpretation of using timber, and the ceiling was kainite, but absolute disaster.
Why?
Kainite. Oh well, it's sort of in our climate. It sort of sagged between. But I remember John Whalton showed me a house that he'd just finished in Spring Hill with kainite ceiling, and it looked, very good. I only saw it that one time soon after he built it, and our house looked. John went over to the United States, and I don't think he's been back since. Did some lovely work. Only a few little things are here, beautiful work, and anyway, our house too was crisp and nice. But after a few summers with the humidity and it sagging, and then the possums getting in the roof and relieving themselves on the kainite, and it really didn't look too good. So we left it there and then sheeted over the whole lot with plasterboard. But it was a house that it was a good developing it, and I happened to speak to one of my second year students a couple of weeks ago, and he remembered me with teaching, because I took second year at the university for a little while, part-time, and during the construction period when I got the roof on, I took the whole year out there to see that
Yeah.
and experience it, because it was rather, especially when no one had moved in, it was just the shade, dawn, and before the bracing was in, it had a little bit of a shake, and the students enjoyed that, and he's remembered that since.
Yeah.
No, that was a nice time. The same group, nothing to do with this. He reminded me that when I took the whole group to the ballet, and I was trying to, there were 16 I think of the group, and I trying to explain to them or get them to understand the fourth dimension. And then I said, how many have been to the ballet? And no one put up their hands. So I then organised with the Queensland Ballet to take them along to a rehearsal. So all of the 16, or most of them, came along to this rehearsal, and I was able to show them what the fourth dimension, people moving through space, and what it does to the space. And
that was an eye-opener for them.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a long while ago, and then this guy is, I don't know, he must be 64 or something now, and he would have been 20 at the time, so that's 40 years back.
It was a memorable experience, clearly.
Yes.
Taking you back once more to the houses, when you were describing O'Neill House, you said it had some Japanese influences, but you said that it was a Brisbane house.
Well, it was Japanese in reflection, probably. I hadn't been to Japan by then, but I've always been receptive to Japanese, like the verandas and the house and the framing, that's traditional Japanese sort of look. So it was that. It didn't look like a Sydney or a Melbourne house.
And what makes you say that?
Well, because it was so open, and it was the built for our climate on a fair-sized portion of land in a treed suburb of St Lucia. It's been knocked down now, and it's been replaced by some funny-looking thing.
So basically, because it was open and because of the verandas and the porches, and
it just had a feel as though if you try to say, "Oh, this looks a bit something or other," you'd probably think it looks a bit Japanese, but it wasn't designed ostensibly to do that. It was a straight interpretation of the site and the needs and the climate.
I'm wondering, or I have a theory, and you can say it's not right or it is right.
Yeah.
But from the conversations I've had with people, I have the impression that in the residential design, there's much more this influence of how the tradition of how it was built, how people built in Queensland before, than in the larger projects. Because also the last time we spoke to you, you mentioned that you're a big fan of the houses by Dalton and Hayes and Scott, and you said they kind of drifted off in the larger projects. Do you think they drifted off because at that time there was no tradition yet of these larger projects that were coming up in the post-war period, because all these campus designs and musea and whatever, they didn't have really like a reference. There was no tradition of those larger projects yet. Is that why you think they drifted off? Because they had to look to international things, and there was not international examples, and it was not really an answer for that here, or an example?
I don't know. I think if you're doing houses and and those people I mentioned did some beautiful work, then your mind, your experience is onto the small details of people and use, and small spaces, and a close proximity between you and the materials and the textures, and that's just the way it is, and it enables them to develop, Hayden Scott with their beautiful textures and the houses that came through. But at the same time, I remember Cam Scott, he was also one of my tutors, and he was a very good tutor, and he took us the 4th year, I think, or 5th. And I remember him holding the view that he didn't want to do another house again because of the stress of relating, and keeping the clients happy. And the clients on a residential thing, you can get the luck of the draw. You can do well, or some might be difficult because they change their mind or whatever they do. And indeed, one of my partners now, that's one of the practices partners that came in my later years, James Gross, in Sydney. When I was talking to James before he joined us, he just broadly sort of touching on this opportunity, and he said, "Graham, if I have to do another kitchen, I'll go mad." And he was doing beautiful steel housing and wonderful work, but it was the dealing. So I can understand there's a feeling of the architect that they'd like to get out and do more, have a bigger experience. But I think when they get, and I can't be general about this at all, but Glenn Murcutt, he's able to get into bigger work, but he still doesn't do. He does bigger than houses, but he really doesn't do big sort of work. And I think, well, I don't know, but I could imagine them being a bit at sea, there's different stresses, particularly now when you're dealing, say, with a project manager, and you can't deal with a project manager the same way that you're dealing with clients. And when you can deal with a project manager that you're sensitive to, or you're on the same wavelength, and there are different needs of budget control and time and department heads or something, they're entirely different than dealing with a client. And whereas in a house, a client and an architect might have a rapport or an easy sort of, or even a difficult relationship, but there's this relationship there. But it's quite different when you're getting into a commercial project, and there are different expectations.
Yeah.
And it's only in recent years, I suppose, that in my firm we've got they've specialised in workplace engineering. So that came about, maybe 12 years ago, and it had to come there, and that's a sort of a specialisation for commercial buildings in groups working, where you have to actually get into understanding management processes. And it's a different thing. For instance, when we did the NAB headquarters, it was all about the way people worked and related to each other, and NAB weren't terribly fussed about what the building was going to look like. And it was all this the heart of what a building's about.
Yeah, that's interesting. But in response to the question, which buildings do you think are icon buildings in general in Queensland since 1945? So you mentioned a lot of houses.
Which houses?
You said houses by Hayes and Scott, or residential projects, houses by John Dalton, the Glen Fallock apartments in New Farm by Coronator and Charlton. Why do you think these projects are icon buildings, or why do you think they're relevant in practice?
Well, they're not relevant.
Practice of, not the practice of Bligh Jessup, but the practice of architecture in Queensland.
Well, the Hayes and Scott houses were just as good as you find anywhere in the country. You know, they were sort of like to me as a young architect coming through, they were a beacon. They were as good as you could get. And the work of John Dalton, similarly, he was able to sustain that. And I know I've only seen one of John's buildings post that, which is up at McGregor College, up at Sunshine, not up at Toowoomba, at the university, and it was disappointing for a John Dalton building, but then John Dalton, it probably would have driven him mad because he was working again as a cyber arm of the state works, and he would have been limited in what he can do. It would have been talking to the client, and I'd imagine he would have been disappointed with some of that. And then Hayes and Scott did okay. Eddie Hayes was more easy to get into commercial things. In fact, he actually then worked as an associate of Conrad and Gargott for a while, and they did a key building down at the QUT, which is very good. But that wasn't Cam, that was Eddie. And what was the other one?
Glen Fallock Apartments in New Farm.
Glen Fallock Apartments. I think the first high-rise residential building here was that building at Torbrick, yeah. And then I think Glen Fallock would have almost been next. I'm not sure, but it always looked as though it had had an architect design it. It was more international than Torbrick. It was crisp, cool, calm and collected, which is all you'd expect from Coronado and Charlton.
And what makes you say that it was more international than Torbrick?
Oh, it was. Torbrick was still, I think, it was a bit of a lump. I don't wish to denigrate it because it explored new territory, but it wasn't an inspiring to me as an architect, whereas Glen Fallock came along and it was just cool, calm and collected. It may not have been contextually right for the area, but that's not a fault of the architect, it's a fault of the briefing. And in hindsight, I mean, I walk past it every now and again, and I see that they've reclad the whole building with a new cladding, but it still suits the building. And so I think that was because high-rise residential buildings were still in their infancy, and there's so much awful high-rise domestic residential buildings that are built, and yet this one's still able to retain its integrity, and I think it's a good mark of a building if it can retain its integrity. And then Coronado and Charlton went on to do Glen. There are a pair of them closer to the city. They're currently being altered for. They were owned by a church. Anyway, I don't know, but they are another version. They at the time were quite, they were good the way that's cool, calm and collected.
Bligh Jessup also did its fair amount of high rise. You did the MLC.
Yeah,
and
we did
Watkins Place.
we did Camden
Yeah.
and Camden Stage 1, and thank heavens Camden Stage 2 was never built. It would have been awfully rude on the Hamilton Hill.
But when you did those high-rise buildings, because you said it was still in its infancy, it was still in its early days,
Yeah.
where were you looking to for inspiration or references? Was it works like, even though Glenfellow Apartments was residential, that predated MLC and Camden? It was before you did those, the Glenfellow Apartments? And were you looking at that as a reference for how to do high-rise or how to position high-rise?
No. I think Camden might have even been built before Glenfellow, about the same time. No, I was just a wee young scrap of a young architect, but no, that was done. In fact, don't think Camden. I wasn't in the firm when Camden. It was before I joined the firm. I'm pretty sure.
Well, it seems that my understanding is when we ask people for architects from the period what they consider the iconic buildings of Queensland, invariably everybody mentions Hayes and Scott and Dalton for their houses, but there's no consensus on who was setting the tone for the larger projects. Who do you think was setting the tone for these large projects in that period?
Oh, there was Conrad and Garrett.
Yeah, or do you think that Bligh Jessup was one of the pioneers for those, because the firm did mostly these large projects?
Yeah, but we only got into larger projects in more recent, in the in the 1980s, probably. In 75 we went, the firm wasn't doing huge work. I don't think very many people in Brisbane were. And Conrad and Gargett, and I trained with Conrad and Gargett, they were certainly doing big work, mainly in big hospitals or the newspaper offices or something. But as we were doing bigger work than some of the other architects were doing, like Fulton Collin were doing bigger, and Philip Smith Conwell, and I think Theo Thine's office was very important in historically in time, because I know Robin Gibson worked with Theo Thine. I'm going too long?
I know.
Yeah. And Don Winson there, and Don Winson, his name doesn't come up a great deal, but he was one of my icon students anyway. He's very ill just now. And he's, but those people, I think Ian Charlton has always been good, and I think when Ian was with Conrad and Gargan, they did the Commonwealth Bank and the two Commonwealth Banks, and I don't know, I think he wasn't there when they did the SGIO building.
I don't know if he was there.
No, he wasn't there. That was Lou, Lou Haley. I think those were good buildings, and I think the Commonwealth Bank in King George Square is one of the better high-rise buildings in the city. And the Reserve Bank building, I think that is probably the best high-rise building still, and that was built so long ago with Bob Cummings and Bruce Lucas before he started the department here, which is a long while ago, and it still looks like it's always a good measure if a building's kept its integrity, and you can tell, and it's kept its integrity. And I think I used to be I still am happy, this is post-75, with what was Watkins Place when it was built, and that was a good building. No columns in that. So it was, all the engineers and the architects and the builders were all well enmeshed, and again pushing the boundaries. But I remember Doug thinking at the time, look, we're not getting any of these works, and I can understand that because there was a very parochial view in Queensland where if you want to get someone, you've got to go down south. Same as it was an Australian thing. If you want to get something good for nationally, you've got to go overseas. And I think that's starting to be settled down. One of the reasons we went down to Sydney, we fairly well had the stadium there, but it wasn't sort of all completed as a commission, and was the fact that we were missing out on things because projects were going to Southern architects, and so the only thing we could do was to go down there, and we got the feeling it had to be a principal that goes, which is why I went there and John went down to Melbourne.
So do you think it was in that period basically that Queensland architects kind of established themselves as showing that they were also able, because Bligh Jessup went down to Sydney and Melbourne.
But they weren't, I think we were the only people who had a principal go down.
But do you think in that period it was Queensland architects kind of proved that they could deliver the same quality or even better quality work than they could in Sydney, was it, because it seems to me that Brisbane architects were a bit nationally off the radar in that period.
Yes.
Do you think in that period they were put on the map, or do you think it was still later on that happened?
I think they became more on the map with work like Hayes and Scott and John Dalton. I think that those guys were pretty important. The other important one here was Neville Lund working with Peter Newell. And Peter Newell...
They went up to, at a certain point, didn't their firm establish somewhere higher up in Queensland?
Yes, yeah, they did, through John Morton.
Yeah.
I don't know whether John's still alive.
I don't know.
Anyway, that's... Yeah, John was pretty smart. Socially, he was... Mustn't say anymore.
Okay.
But so they did there's some good things up there at the universities. And I think it was good having Jim Burrell here, and Jim Burrell with his partner Lauren Cully, and who kept in the background. And I don't think many people met him, but he was a big force in the quality of Jim's design work. You get that, I think, with practices where you get two architects, different strengths, but together they do a product take them apart and they can't function. So that was
But you,
very good work.
but you don't mention, for the icon buildings, you don't mention any of Burrell's work in the list. What do you think is for Burrell?
Was that in...
For his centenary pool and the library at Annerley and working...
Union College, I think.
Yeah.
Was that before 97?
That's in that period, yeah.
Oh, well, I would put that there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that was... oh no, I think in those round here, it was some very good work. Oh, can I put it in?
No, you don't have to. It's
no,
just,
I'd like to. I'd like to. I've forgotten about that, and I think there was the agricultural college, the veterinary science building.
By Wilson Architects?
No, by Jim Burrell, the brick one down.
Ah, okay.
Down near the car park.
It's possible. Yeah, there are several veterinary science buildings, because I looked at one by Wilson Architects just last week.
No, before it was one of the early, about the time of the
Union College.
Union College.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good.
And I think that was, well, there you go, out of, because you don't go past the buildings or something. No, I think that was important. Yes, the swimming pool, but I wouldn't have called that, for me anyway, it wasn't a memorable icon building. And there'll probably be some others there that I can't even remember.
I think you mentioned most of we discussed most of the...
I put an oddball in there in the...
Which one?
The...
Igloos.
The igloos at the Wackov.
What are those?
And I don't think anyone else would have had those.
No?
I did national service and I spent 3 months resident in one of those igloos, and they were built by the American Army, but all they were was sort of a 2/3 of a cylinder of galvanised steel with a wall at each end and a timber floor. And I think that sort of language of curving tin and what you can do with curved tin was an important... I've been conscious of it, as using it more or less not as a sculptural thing, but as a way to handle that product. So for me, it was I've been conscious of it, and I like to throw an oddball in here and there.
And are they still there, those igloos?
I don't think so, probably. I think they probably would have been knocked down.
And what was the purpose of them being built? Because they were temporary structures, or were they fixed structures?
Oh, well, the whole army camp was temporary. They were built for the army camp, and then we went in as national service, and they were still used. 8 as a dormitory. The whole field of them, the whole company was all held in these igloos.
That's fun. And they were like packages, standard packages that you could just set up. Was it like that?
Although I'd done very cheaply and very quickly.
And were they produced in Queensland?
During the war.
Were they imported?
No, they weren't imported. No, they would have been produced here with the American Army.
It's funny. Interesting.
Yeah, it was. They really were.
It would be interesting to find some imagery of those igloos at Wackle. I'll check if I can find something. It would be great. Well, I think I won't detain you any longer unless you think of something else that you really want to get off your chest.
Yeah, no.
Okay. Thank you so much for